there's a pretty big difference between what happened to people, the facts of what happened, the history, and the narrative. And that's the story we tell ourselves, right? My wife is a perfect example of this. She'll tell you the story of when she got fired, and she was never fired, right? It's never happened in her life. She's never been fired. You probably have heard someone tell you a story about when they've been fired, and it sounds like my boss came in, looked at me and said, "You're fired." That never happened for her, right? She was a school teacher, and the way school teaching works, right, is every year when you're not tenured, you have to get rehired for the next year. And in one of the schools, with one of the principals, she didn't get rehired, which is a far cry from being fired. Now, it's semantics, right? It doesn't matter. Either way, she didn't have a job the next year. She had to go find a job, etc. But by telling herself that she'd been fired, right, by holding on to that narrative rather than what actually happened, right, it affected the way she thought of herself. It affected the way she thought about her job. It affected the way she thought about her future work and this notion that she could potentially be fired at any point. And there was a little thread in that story, which was, I'm someone who's been fired, right? Which creates its own insecurity or anything else as it relates to the decisions you make going forward. That's just one simple example. But the reality is that a lot of us have the story we're telling ourselves about ourselves, and it may not actually be the reality, right? It may not be the facts. And so it's important, right? The key takeaway here, right, is that as you're progressing through, as you're living life and you're having experiences on projects, on collaborations, on anything else, when it's over, take a step to do a recap, right? Take a moment to gather people together and talk through what happened, right? And what you'll discover is by getting a group of people together to reflect collaboratively, you'll take all those little versions of the narrative that maybe were shadowed by how you thought about something, and those will get peeled off, and you'll get the closest approximation to reality. That's the value of doing a reflection across a team.